All right, welcome to today's presentation, how to play gigs and actually make money. So a little bit of background about myself. I play in a folk duo called the Fab Folk, and this is me with my wife Melissa, and we play Beatles songs, acoustic, and we play at county fairs and weddings and do lots of fun things throughout the year. But before that, let me take you back to my early days. I've been playing in bands since I was in high school. This is actually a band I had in college back when I had hair and was really good looking. And back then, I used to try to get as many gigs as I could. And my focus was make fans. And, we had a fairly good following. A couple hundred people would show up to our shows, and it was a lot of fun. And eventually what happened was I got older, and then people kind of stopped showing up. And I can understand that. They get older, they have kids, and to go to a show they need a babysitter, and all kinds of other reasons. So it got to a point where it was like, okay, do I really want to keep doing this? It's what do I do, and how do I make this fun again is what it boiled down to. So I started brainstorming and thinking about gigs and playing music and figuring out what do I want to do. So I'm going to share with you kind of my journey on figuring out what it looks like to play gigs and how to make it fun and how to make it enjoyable and worthwhile. So step one is back to what do I want to do. And so when I started looking into opportunities, I first looked at two criteria. So one, does it pay? And then second, are there people already there? So they're not relying on me to bring my fans to fill up the place, for instance. So with those two criteria in mind, I started to seek out opportunities. And here's some of the things that I found as I've played gigs. And some of these things might be applicable to you. They might not. I'm also going to share how much money that I've made on each of these opportunities. And so again, that it might be different in your town, but at least might give you some ideas of what to pursue. So first, I kind of started with some of the obvious places. So first, restaurants. And what I found, typically restaurants, they want acoustic music. They want you to kind of be in the background for a few hours. The audiences, they're usually there to eat their food. So don't expect them to be too excited, but excuse me. But still a fun opportunity to play music. And I've found you can make anywhere from $0, or maybe it's just food they feed you, up to $100 or more is what I've found with restaurants. And again, it might be different for you, but that's something to consider. Another one that's maybe kind of obvious is the bars. So this is where people go to hang out and drink. Usually it's later on at night. One thing I've found is they usually want longer sets, 2 to 3 hours of music. It could be different for you, but and sometimes the audience is into it, sometimes they're not. It just sort of depends. But one thing that's nice is they tend to pay a little bit more than restaurants, and I've found you can usually make anywhere from $100 to $500 or more from a bar gig. So that's another thing to consider. Also, weddings. Playing weddings, I've found there's typically two kinds of music they want in a wedding. So there's kind of the party wedding versus the chill background music wedding. And so kind of going into it, you need to be aware of what they're looking for there. But generally, really long sets, anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, depending on what their schedule is like. The audience, they're there for the bride and the groom. So they're usually not there for you, but sometimes people are into it. So it can kind of depend. But these tend to be, as far as pay goes, a step up from bars. You can make, depending on what you're doing, anywhere from $500 to $2,000 or more at a wedding. So they really can vary quite a bit. Another place that I looked into that I've found success is fairs and festivals. And I'm talking about maybe like a community festival, county fair, that kind of thing. So what I found, typically they want like a mix of styles when they have a schedule of performers. And it helps to do covers, but not always the case. You could do some originals, but they usually want it to be upbeat and for a family-friendly audience. And usually these sets are a little bit shorter, 45 to an hour or 90 minutes long. And the audience, sometimes they're into it, sometimes they aren't, but that just kind of goes with it. But what's nice is these are kind of in the middle of the day. You're not out too late, and you can go and play a shorter set, and usually they're in charge of the sound, and you can make anywhere from $300 to $1,000 or more on this kind of event. Corporate events. So typically I found these are like a reception setting or a conference of some kind. Usually they want the music a little bit softer, but not always the case. Usually it might be around a networking event that's on a schedule, so you kind of have a tighter time of when you need to start and stop. But for what it is, these events can be pretty well paying, $1,000 to $3,000 or more. Again, it all kind of depends. But I found that to be a good opportunity. Another spot, college campuses. They're always looking for live entertainment of some kind. So sometimes it's a back to school party, or they just want somebody to play in a lounge for an hour or two. But those can kind of vary too. Another place to consider, you can make anywhere from $100 to $1,000 or more. So here's a few more gigs that are maybe less common that maybe you hadn't thought of, that I certainly hadn't until I looked into it. But ski resorts. I live in Utah. There's a lot of snow here, and we have about a dozen ski resorts. And so for me, it's a good place to look into. Sometimes they want us to play outdoors as people are coming in from the slopes, and that can be really rough. I've also played inside the lodge as they're kind of warming up, so that's a little funner. But usually they want 1 to 2 hours of music is what I found, and you can make anywhere from $200 to $500 in those situations. Nursing homes doesn't sound like the most exciting gig, but it's another opportunity to perform, and it pays. And so you have to kind of cater to the audience a little bit. They're older folks, and I've done sets where it's 1 to 2 hours, and you can make anywhere from $100 to $600 or more at those type of events. So something to look into. Another thing, so this kind of overlaps with the other gigs, but Christmas gigs. So this could be a company reception. They're having a Christmas party and they want some background music. And so we found some success in getting an hour of Christmas music ready, and then as the occasions come up and the opportunities present themselves, we're ready with some music to play. So yet another thing to consider. I found anywhere from $300 to $600 is kind of the going rate, but again, that's our market. Could be different for you, but yeah, those are some of the gigs, and I'm sure there's more out there, but those are some ideas to kind of get you thinking. If you're just starting out, there might be some other gigs you might want to consider to start with that maybe they don't pay as much money at first, but there's always coffee shops, all ages clubs, open mics, or just performing on the streets, or throwing a house party for your friends. Those are all things to consider that when you're first starting to get some experience, or if you're having fun and you find a way to make money at those, then go for it, do that. But that's another path. They can be low paying, but it's always something there to consider that you can do, and it can kind of fill in the gaps when you're doing these other paying gigs. So part of exploring these opportunities, I had to overcome some mental hurdles. So I just wanted to maybe throw out a few of those that you might be thinking yourself. So cover bands are super lame. So when I was playing in my band, we were really strict about, we only play originals. We don't do covers because we're an original band. So I had to kind of overcome that hurdle because a lot of these opportunities wanted covers. And so my thought to that was, well, why don't I make one that's actually good? We have be original, have some interesting arrangements, and make it a good cover band. So another thing, you're playing your gigs and nobody's clapping because, I'm used to, playing for my fans and everybody claps and loves me. But, I had to kind of get used to that a little bit. But you have to understand, a lot of these opportunities, they're not there to see you. They're there to, eat their food or hang out with their friends or be at the wedding. So, one way to think of it is this is kind of a paid rehearsal. I'm getting paid to play my music, whether they're listening or not. So another thing is I had the thought, was this really what I've become? Am I just some dad playing covers? And so I had to kind of overcome that a little bit and realize that these opportunities, the money I make, enables me to pursue other things. I can pour it into some of my original music, or go on trips, or do things I'm more excited about. So this is just another way to help you accomplish your other goals as well too. Some things to consider when you're selecting on what type of gigs you want to play. So, are you more comfortable with originals or covers? So, that could play into what type of gigs you pursue. Are you acoustic act or are you a full band? Again, that will help you select which opportunities make sense for you. Excuse me. Also, how many people are in your act? The more people you have, there's more schedules to juggle. There's more rehearsing that needs to be done, and the fewer people, that makes those things a little simpler. But again, it might make sense with your music on what you're pursuing. You just have to consider that, and also how many ways you want to divide the money. Are you good with a loop pedal? That helps to kind of fill out your arrangement a little bit if you're a solo artist. Also, can you work a crowd? So if you're, somebody who's a little more introverted and you don't like speaking up as much, maybe a type of the gig where you're in the background makes a little more sense for you. So, those are some excuse me, those are some things to consider. Also, let me help you think of it another way too. Here's a series of circles here. First one, here's one circle. What the things that you're good at. The next circle is what you're passionate about. And then the last is what people are willing to pay you for. So the idea is we want to get to that spot in the middle, which I call the sweet spot, where all of these things kind of align. So before, when I was playing gigs, I was kind of at the top where I was playing things where I was good at, I was passionate about it, but I didn't really have the opportunity to make money. So, as you're thinking about what type of gigs to pursue, you want to, you might not get there right away, but you want to kind of work your way towards the middle so that it's a good situation all around. So back to that list. Here's all those different gigs I talked about. Again, there might be some other ones, but what I want you to do now is look at this list and pick 2 of these gig types from the list that you're going to pursue. So think about that for a minute and write it down, or you can leave it in the comments. Okay, everybody good? All right, let's move on. So now that we've figured out what we want to do as far as gigs go, we need to move on to step 2. Who do we need to talk to? And so to do that, we're going to divide this up into 2 types of gigs. There's what I call outbound gigs, or in other words, I go to them. I'm seeking the gig out to them. And so to get you started there, you need to do a little bit of research. There's one website I recommend, indieonthemove.com. It has a directory of different venues and places you can go that you get a bunch of information for your town and on ideas of where you could pursue. Also, there's a website, indievenuebible.com, and they sell these PDF packages that have a list of venues and festivals and colleges and places. It's by region, so it has, I think, 4 or 5 states in one packet, and you pay $25. And it doesn't give you all the contact information, but at least it gives you kind of a starting place of where you could look into, and it also lists what type of music they play at each of these opportunities. So that's another thing to consider as you research. Also, if there's like a city weekly or some sort of event paper, usually they have lots of events listed, so you can get some ideas there and start writing those down. Or another option to look into is if there's another local musician who's playing a lot of gigs and you want to play the same type of gigs, just go to their website and look at their list of where they're playing. And that's helped me before, where I found there were some places on their list of shows that I hadn't even thought of that I was able to look into later on and get some gigs there. So another thing to consider. Of course, there's always Google. You could do it as simple as summer events and, put in your town or your state and wedding event centers in your state, and that will help give you some more ideas of places to look into. And so you also want to consider, who are they actually booking? Are they booking, if it's a bar, is it the type of band are they booking a bunch of blues bands and you're an acoustic act? Does it make sense to go after that? So that's another thing to consider as you look at these opportunities on, which ones are you a good fit for? And then after you've kind of done that research, the other half of the battle is just tracking down, who's in charge, who's in charge of booking. So I would recommend, if you're able to show up in person, if it makes sense, if it's a venue that has somebody there to talk to, and just go ahead and ask them who's in charge of booking. That's probably the simplest way, although it might require you driving across town. Also, there's always their website. Sometimes they don't always list who's in charge of booking, but if you can find an email of somebody, you can at least email that person and then ask them who's in charge of booking and try to work your way down. It's a little bit of a detective hunt trying to find the person sometimes. And then, of course, there's always LinkedIn and Facebook that might have these type of things listed. So you're looking for people with particular job titles. So that might be, if it's a bar, maybe the owner or manager is the one that's doing the booking, or maybe they have a booking agent. If it's a festival or a corporate event of some kind, it might be a talent buyer or an event planner, event coordinator, activity director, maybe if it's like a nursing home or something like that. If it's a corporate event, it might be the marketing event manager. So these are kind of the titles you want to be on the lookout for, because these are the people that can help you get that gig. I'm a little bit of a nerd. I like to keep things on spreadsheets, and so I highly recommend this, though. This is Google has a Google sheet that you can start. So I would put in the columns venue, the city, what type of place it is, and then a contact name and email and phone number, and then put some notes about what your experience is like tracking them down, which days you've emailed them or called them or stopped by. So it kind of helps you keep it all organized. So I highly recommend that. So that'll kind of help you get started as you research your outbound opportunities. I have a little bit of homework for you. So I'd like you to research 10 opportunities. So these could be venues or events that are happening. And these are, you pick those 2 gig types you're going to pursue. So, you could do a couple of each or 5 each or whatever you want to do, but we want to write down 10 opportunities and figure out who the person is you need to talk to, and then find their contact information. So that's your homework. You have 1 week to do that, and then you need to report back to me. So we've talked about outbound gigs. So now there's inbound gigs. And what I mean by that is where they come to me or to you. And these are some examples of what I'm talking about. These are some apps and websites that are out there that I found to be helpful in booking gigs, especially the top 2, GigSalad and Thumbtack. I've found some success there. But basically, you would set up an account, and then as opportunities come, somebody will say they're planning a wedding. They might put they can do it a couple of different ways. They could either search different profiles and then reach out to you for pricing, or they might even, if it's Thumbtack, for instance, they might even say, I'm looking for a band with this type, and then everybody can kind of submit their bids there. So there's different pricing associated with it. Some Thumbtack, it's usually about $10 or so for each bid that you submit. GigSalad and GigMasters have kind of a monthly or a yearly subscription you pay. Although GigSalad does have a free option. And then there's also WeddingWire, specifically people that are researching wedding vendors. It's another place that I've gotten a few responses from. So those are things to consider. Sonic bids, less success there, but maybe it'll work for you. Who knows? But you can set up an account for free and try it out and see what you think. Other ideas. Facebook, there's always groups for musicians. I've gotten a few gigs that way where people come to the page and they're looking for a specific event where they need an act to fill. So, it doesn't hurt to look and see if your town has the equivalent of something like that, where you can kind of stay on top of when people need gigs or need musicians. I mean, locally, there's a couple websites in Utah. They have where they'll list different bands and links. So there might be the equivalent of that in your market, or if there's nonprofit arts organizations that are trying to help musicians, get out there and get connected. So those are some other options to consider. I would also say look into showcase events. So for example, there's the National Association for Campus Activities. And what this is different college campuses, they might have somebody who's the activity director or somebody in charge of student events. And they'll come to this kind of convention and they scout out a bunch of different talent. So this is an opportunity for you to showcase, and usually you have a time slot to perform for 15 or 20 minutes, and then they give you a booth and you kind of talk to all these different people planning events. And so that's another thing to consider if you want to go into college events. There's also the equivalent of that for regional fairs. So here's a few that I know of. Locally, I've pursued the Utah Association of Fairs and Events, and it's been a really fruitful way to get in the market that way, where we've got the chance to perform and then talk to all these people that run the different events in their area. And then along those lines too, if you're looking into weddings, and every town kind of has their own little wedding expos that happen, and you can consider getting a booth there. A lot of vendors will do that, and so why not have a music booth and bring your instruments and just play a little bit for people, or show them some videos or things. So that's another way to connect to people planning weddings and brides and grooms. So your homework, again, pick one inbound option and set up a profile, or you can apply for one showcase. So one of those two, and you have 1 week to do it. So now that we've figured out who we want to talk to, step 3, what do I say? So I want you to write down right now what your niche is in 4 to 7 words. So here's a few examples. My wife and I, when we perform, I use the niche, we are an acoustic tribute to the Beatles. So in a quick nutshell, that lets people know what we do and kind of how we're a little bit different. Another one of my friends, he has a thing he likes to say, he's a funky bluesy roots music is what he plays. Or it could be 90s alternative hits revisited, or it could be hip hop with a higher purpose, or something that in a really quick nutshell, kind of people can get a feel for what you are all about. So sort of like a slogan, basically. So I want you to take a sec here and write that down. All right, let's move on. Now I want you to write down, build your case. So what I mean by that is matching it with your target opportunity. So if you are a county fair, there's certain types of acts you want to book. You're booking bands that are upbeat, that are family friendly, that'll have a good crowd kind of thing. So you want to be able to match that with what you do. And so you might say something like, we're a band that plays upbeat music, and it's family friendly, and it's it's the type of stuff people recognize, and it helps. Basically, you're building your case and of why you're a good match for this type of gig. If it's a wedding, and it's the wedding takes place in a garden, they're probably looking for something more relaxing. And so you could say that very thing. We're a band that plays very relaxing music that goes perfect in a garden. So that type of thing. So you're connecting what you do with what they want. So with your different gig opportunities in mind, write down a couple of phrases or sentences that line up with what you're talking about, with that line up with what their needs are. Okay, we got that? So next thing you need to do is come up with some sort of press kit. So I'll start with, here's the minimum things. You need to have a simple video. This could just be something you did on your phone. You need to have one SoundCloud link. So this could be a song that's in demo form, just something so they can hear you. And then a Facebook page that has your act with 2 photos. And I think that's it to get started. You just, you need to have some of those things. But as you get going, you might want to consider the next level, which would be putting together a professional website, include a list of all the places you've played, maybe create a logo if it makes sense, film some quality videos, maybe have a friend that you do or hire somebody. Consider taking some appropriate photos. So what I mean by that is if you're trying to book a wedding, you need to be dressed in something that's more formal with shirts and ties and, something that makes sense at a wedding. You don't want to wear your scruffy clothes for those photos. But if it's a bar gig you're after, for instance, that might make sense. So just with what you're going after, consider that as an option. So if there's any local reviews or press that you've gotten, you want to include that for sure, or reviews from people you've played gigs for. You might want to consider doing high quality studio recordings, and then starting multiple social media accounts. Maybe if it makes sense, do a Twitter account or an Instagram or something, so that you can have a farther reach. But my point, I guess, is don't let not having these things stop you from booking. Get the minimum down, and then start reaching out for shows. And then as you have time, work your way into the next level and adding these other things to your press kit. So now that we've gotten those things, let's here's an example of this is the website my wife and I have. And we have our logo there in the corner, an acoustic tribute to the Beatles and more. And we had some other photos that our photographer friend took for us that are also on our website there. We've done some videos. This one is just something I filmed on an iPhone, and then I went back and added some typography to it to make it a little more interesting. And then this video I filmed we played a gig in a garden. I thought it had a cool atmosphere. It looked like something from a wedding. But in this case, what I did is I filmed the entire gig, so there was about an hour of footage. And then I took little 15-second snippets from each song, and so it pieced together to be a kind of a sampler video, so you can really quickly hear a little bit of what we sound like with all our different songs. So that might be something to consider. Also, we performed on a local TV show, Park City TV, and I don't think a lot of people watched it, but I was able to get them to record it for us, and they gave us a copy of the video files. And so now we had 4 extra videos that we could start use to give to people we're trying to get a show with, and the audio quality was really nice and it looked really professional. So just another way to maybe get a free video is if there's a local newscast, reach out to them, and sometimes they'll book somebody even if you're not a well-known person. Other things to consider: the Gig Salad. These are some of the reviews we've gotten in Gig Salad. They have a little widget that you can install as a little code. You put it on your site, and it'll embed all the different reviews that you've gotten. SoundCloud, obviously, that's another way to put your music up there. I would recommend listing your different concerts so people can see that you're busy, you're out doing things, so you look like you're more in demand. And then again, listing some of the press you've gotten. So now that we've talked about those things, we're going to kind of put it together here in an email. So the email, you want to have your niche, build a case, and your EPK or your press kit, and then a kind of a call to action. So here's a sample email. I'll just read it to you. So subject line: performing at the Utah Arts Festival, the Fab Folk. Hi, John. I'm with the Fab Folk, an acoustic tribute to the Beatles. I spoke to your manager, Cassie, on the phone, and she recommended I reach out. We'd love to be considered for performing at the Arts Festival this year. We have a mellow yet upbeat, friendly, family-friendly acoustic sound that would fit really well with the music I've heard at past festivals. We started about 2 years ago, and we performed at many community events like the Utah Community Fair, Thanksgiving Point Gardens, and Orem Summerfest. Here's a video of us performing Here Comes the Sun on Park City TV. Visit our website, thefabfolk.com, for more about us, including pictures, videos, and music. Thanks, and I'll look forward to hearing from you. So that's a really simple way. It's to the point, but you get a chance to talk about what your niche is, how you'd be a good fit for what their event is, and then kind of plug some of your promotional materials so they get a chance to check you out. And then the call to action is you're asking them to respond and let you know where they're at. So that's one part of your homework, is to create an email yourself, and this is an example you can look to. So follow up, this is very important. I would follow up. Your first follow up is after 1 week, if you haven't heard back yet, and just say something simple like, "Hey, just checking in to see where your interest is in having us perform. Let me know when you get a minute. Thanks." Just real simple, to the point. And I would suggest continue to follow up every 2 to 4 weeks. You don't want to do it every week, but I think it's good to remind them. And my advice would be to be patient. If they don't respond, it doesn't mean they aren't interested. Usually they have a lot of things going on, especially if they're a business owner. And I found it usually takes anywhere from 3 to 5 or more emails before you'll get a response. So just keep that kind of thing in mind when you're emailing, that sometimes it takes a little bit. And I would just say, when you follow up, don't say things like, "Did you read my last email? I don't mean to be a pest," because you've basically, accused them of either ignoring you, or you've accused them of, thinking that you're annoying. So you don't want to do that. And then if the emails or phone calls just aren't working, I would say to go in person again and follow up. And you might have to leave a business card with somebody, but at least you're persistent. The phrase I've heard is to be politely persistent. So again, don't be annoying, but keep up with it and kind of constantly remind them that you're interested. And you kind of have to ride that fine line a little bit, but that's the people that are persistent are the ones that get the gigs, is what it comes down to. One tool I would highly recommend is HubSpot Sales. It's actually free, and it's a Chrome extension, and it links up if you use Gmail. It links with Gmail, and so when you're signed in and you use this with your Gmail account, it'll let you know if the person has opened the email or if they've clicked on any of the links in your email. So that'll help you kind of gauge how interested they are, and if they're actually ignoring you or not, or what to expect there. They also have some email templates, so you're not retyping the same thing over and over, and kind of helps you sort of gauge the interest of the people. So now that you've gotten the gig, step 4, show me the money. So pricing is one thing to consider. What do I charge? And this is always kind of a tricky question, but my advice is to base it off of people's willingness to pay. You don't want to leave any money on the table if they're willing to pay more. And so that can involve some research. You might need to figure out what other bands are being played. You might even directly ask them, and maybe they'll tell you, maybe they won't. And then there's a wedding website, theknot.com, that can tell you what local people are spending on weddings for music. And you might even have to bid different prices and kind of figure out which price is where you're getting the gig at or not. So, and that could vary from person to person, but another way to approach it. I would also say that being the lowest isn't always the best. Sometimes there's a quality perception. So if you're the cheapest person, they think that maybe your music isn't the best. And so you might want to consider that too when you're putting your bid out there, because I've found that lowest isn't always the one that gets it. So I would consider maybe keeping your price fairly high, but then you could throw in something like, "We'll work with your budget." So they know that there's some flexibility, so that you might not be ruled out if you're afraid of that. So I would also recommend coming up with personally your own minimum price. This isn't a price you're going to share with others, but you want to consider your total time commitment involved. So this is kind of a gig by gig case. So you want to look at what's the travel time involved, what's the time to set up and break down. So for instance, if you're bringing your own PA, that's going to add another hour or more to your time commitment maybe. How long they want you to perform. And then are there extra rehearsals involved? If it's a wedding, you might have to learn some of their requests or all that kind of thing. So you want to consider all those things when you're coming up with a price. And I would even, have an hourly price in your head. Again, I wouldn't tell them what that is, but at least for you, kind of what you're willing to do for how much time is going to go into the gig. Some other factors that might change it is in a nice setting. So, a garden at a wedding, for instance, is a nice spot to play. Is the audience enjoyable or attentive? And are they enjoying it? Which helps you to enjoy the gig yourself too. And then will it lead to other gigs? There's been a few weddings I've played at where it's led to other gigs for weddings. So, and how available are you? So if you have the entire month packed full of gigs, you might want to charge a little bit more to make it worth your while, so you're not kind of chasing some of the cheaper gigs if you're already pretty busy. So some things to consider. Again, I'm a little bit of a nerd. You can put it on a spreadsheet, and you can list all the different amount of time it's going to take for each of these things. And then there's formulas you can put in to add it up, the total hours, and then come up with your own hourly wage. And then that'll give you kind of a minimum price of what's sort of the rock bottom you're willing to do the gig for. Again, you want to try to get as high as you can and get what they're willing to pay for, but at least that gives you some guidance. So, so yeah, that's pricing. And then the last part would be playing the gig. And just, I would recommend, again, with the spreadsheet, to try to track everything down, write down the dates you played the gigs, the venue. You can do this either before the gig happens or after, but at least you want to have kind of a running history so you know how much you made, and you can kind of track your progress a little bit. And if there's a place where you're trying to get a repeat gig, you have a history that you can refer to of how much they paid you last time, so you can kind of gauge how much to charge the next time, or whether it's worth your while. So highly recommend that. Also, just a few more tips is just be a person that's really easy to work with. Show up early, be appreciative, tell them thank you afterwards. You don't want to be a jerk and so they don't book you again. I would recommend having a good energy when you perform. This can be difficult sometimes if the audience is not clapping, they're not into it. You still need to kind of put on a show anyway and have some good energy. Last, I would also consider some ways to get some extra money. So put out a tip jar. You need to think of that ahead of time so you actually have a jar with you when you show up to the gig, or the equivalent of a jar, I guess. And then, if it makes sense for your act, print up some merch and maybe see if it sells at these gigs. Wouldn't recommend it for certain things like weddings. You're not going to sell merch at a wedding, but if the gig makes sense, that might be something to consider. Then also promotional materials. I didn't think people still use business cards, but I've played so many gigs where people wanted a business card afterwards, so I went ahead and got some printed, and it's been really helpful actually. And then we have a banner for our band that it's retractable. It'll fold up and say our name and have our contact info. So as people are kind of watching, especially if it's like a county fair or something, they can walk by and really quickly figure out who you are and how to reach out to you. So that's been helpful too. And then after the gig's over, I would make sure to send a follow-up email to the person that booked you and thank them, and go ahead and ask them for another date if it makes sense. Or if it's maybe it's an annual event, ask them to consider you for next year again if you've enjoyed it. So that's it in a nutshell. But what I want you to do now is write down some goals for the rest of the year for 2019. And these goals are going to be to create a plan, and your plan's going to say how much booking time are you going to invest each week. So I would recommend an hour or two, but depending on the way the gigs go, sometimes you have to kind of do it in spurts. But I like to do it while I'm watching TV, so it's not such a pain. I can kind of just multitask. But figure out how much time you're going to devote to booking. Also come up with a goal for how many gigs you want to get and what kinds. So that could be, I want to get 10 festival gigs this year and I want to book 5 weddings or whatever the case may be. So think about that. And then the last part is how much money do I want to make? So, you can come up with sort of an average for the type of gigs and then add it all up, and that's kind of your target for the year. So I've found that's really helpful. That kind of motivates me to keep booking when I have something I'm shooting for. So take a minute to write those things down, create a plan here for 2019. And that's it. So thank you so much for listening. You can come up to me if you have any questions or leave them in the comment box, and I'd be happy to answer them and continue the discussion. Thank you very much.